For 8 years, two neighboring countries fought one of the bloodiest wars of the 20th century. Over 1 million people died, hundreds of thousands were wounded, displaced, or traumatized forever. Chemical weapons were used on civilian populations. Children were sent to clear minefields. Cities were bombed into rubble. Yet this war receives only a fraction of the historical attention it deserves. The Iran-Iraq War lasted from 1980 to 1988. It reshaped the entire Middle East. It strengthened the Islamic Republic of Iran. It created the conditions that led to Saddam Hussein's later invasions. It is the forgotten war that explains almost everything happening in the Middle East today. This is its story. To understand why this war started, we must understand what both countries looked like in 1980. Iran had just experienced its Islamic Revolution in 1979. The Shah had fled. Ayatollah Khomeini had established the Islamic Republic. The country was in revolutionary chaos. Its military had been purged of officers loyal to the Shah. Its economy was under Western sanctions. It was internationally isolated and internally unstable. Next door, Iraq was ruled by Saddam Hussein, who had consolidated absolute power in 1979 through a brutal purge of potential rivals. He was ambitious, ruthless, and watching Iran's weakness with calculating eyes. He saw an opportunity that he believed would never come again. Saddam Hussein had multiple motivations for invading Iran. First, he wanted control of the Shatt al-Arab waterway, a strategic river forming part of the Iran-Iraq border, essential for Iraqi oil exports. Second, he wanted to annex the oil-rich Iranian province of Khuzestan, which had a significant Arab population. Third, and most importantly, he feared that Iran's Shia Islamic Revolution would inspire Iraq's own Shia majority population to rise against his Sunni-dominated government. By attacking Iran while it was weak, Saddam calculated he could achieve territorial gains, prevent revolutionary contagion, and establish himself as the dominant power in the Middle East. He expected a quick victory within weeks. On September 22, 1980, Iraqi forces launched a massive invasion of Iran on multiple fronts simultaneously. Iraqi aircraft struck Iranian air bases in surprise attacks. Iraqi ground forces crossed the border with hundreds of tanks and tens of thousands of soldiers. The initial assault was overwhelming. Iranian border defenses collapsed in many areas. Iraqi forces advanced rapidly into Iranian territory. The city of Khorramshahr fell after brutal urban combat that earned it the name City of Blood. Abadan, home to one of the world's largest oil refineries, came under siege. Iraq controlled significant Iranian territory within weeks. Saddam declared victory prematurely. He had no idea what was coming. Saddam had miscalculated catastrophically. Rather than collapsing, the Iranian Revolution gave Iranians something to fight for with extraordinary passion. The Islamic Republic framed the war as a sacred defense of Islam and the revolution against a godless aggressor backed by Western imperialism. Volunteer militias called Basij flooded recruitment centers. Young men, teenagers, and even boys volunteered in enormous numbers. Religious fervor transformed the conflict from a conventional military engagement into something approaching a holy war for Iranian defenders. Iranian forces, though initially disorganized and poorly equipped, fought with a ferocity that shocked Iraqi commanders who had expected the revolution-weakened military to collapse quickly and completely. Iran developed a devastating and heartbreaking tactic to compensate for its lack of sophisticated weapons: human wave attacks. Thousands of soldiers and volunteers would advance simultaneously across open ground toward Iraqi positions. The losses were catastrophic, but the sheer numbers overwhelmed Iraqi defensive positions in many cases. Most heartbreaking of all was the use of child soldiers. Young boys, some as young as 12, were recruited into the Basi militia. They were given plastic keys to paradise and told that martyrdom in battle guaranteed them heaven. These children were sent to clear minefields by walking through them. The human cost of this war was almost incomprehensible in its scale and tragedy. As the war continued, it settled into patterns horrifyingly reminiscent of World War I. Both sides dug extensive trench systems stretching hundreds of miles. Artillery barrages preceded infantry assaults. Soldiers lived in muddy trenches for months at a time. Neither side could achieve decisive breakthrough. Iraq used poison gas attacks against Iranian trench positions, a war crime that the international community largely ignored because most Western powers were supporting Saddam Hussein against revolutionary Iran. The trenches filled with water in winter. The heat was unbearable in summer. Disease spread through the ranks. Young men on both sides rotted in trenches fighting over small strips of contested ground that changed hands repeatedly. Iraq's use of chemical weapons during the Iran-Iraq War was one of the greatest war crimes of the 20th century. Saddam Hussein used mustard gas and nerve agents against both Iranian military positions and civilian populations. The most devastating attack came at Halabja in 1988, when Iraqi forces used chemical weapons against their own Kurdish civilian population, killing between 3,000 and 5,000 people in a single attack. The international community's response was shamefully inadequate. Western nations that were supporting Iraq against Iran essentially looked away. The United States continued providing Iraq with intelligence and economic support even after chemical weapon use was confirmed. Oil and Cold War strategy mattered more than human lives. The conflict extended beyond land battles into the Persian Gulf itself, creating what became known as the Tanker War. Both sides attacked each other's oil tankers and shipping in the Persian Gulf, threatening global oil supplies. Iran attacked tankers serving countries that supported Iraq. Iraq attacked Iranian oil infrastructure in tankers. The United States intervened militarily to protect shipping, reflagging Kuwaiti tankers under the American flag and providing naval escorts. American and Iranian forces clashed directly on several occasions. In 1988, the USS Vincennes mistakenly shot down Iran Air Flight 655, an Iranian civilian airliner, killing all 290 passengers. America never formally apologized. The wound remains open. One of the most significant and unexpected consequences of the Iran-Iraq War was how it strengthened the Islamic Republic internally. The revolution of 1979 was followed immediately by economic chaos, political purges, and internal opposition. Many Iranians were uncertain about the new system, but the Iraqi invasion created a national emergency that united Iranians behind their government. The external threat suppressed internal dissent. Revolutionary leaders used the war to consolidate power, eliminate remaining opposition, and build institutions of the Islamic Republic. The shared sacrifice and suffering of 8 years of war created a generation deeply loyal to the Islamic Republic and deeply suspicious of the outside world, particularly America and its allies. The war brought devastating suffering to civilian populations on both sides. Iraqi aircraft bombed Iranian cities repeatedly. Iranian missiles struck Baghdad and other Iraqi cities. The War of the Cities, as it became known, involved both sides deliberately targeting civilian populations with ballistic missiles and aircraft bombardment. Iranian cities near the border, particularly Ahvaz, Abadan, Khorramshahr, and Dezful, suffered enormous destruction. Hundreds of thousands of civilians fled their homes as refugees. Children grew up knowing nothing but war. Schools were destroyed, hospitals overwhelmed, entire neighborhoods reduced to rubble. The civilian experience of this war was one of constant fear, displacement, loss, and grief that lasted for years beyond the war's end. The Iran-Iraq War was not fought in isolation. Almost every major power had a stake in its outcome and intervened accordingly. The United States supported Iraq with intelligence, economic credits, and diplomatic cover for chemical weapon use. The Soviet Union supplied weapons to both sides at different points. France sold Iraq advanced fighter jets and military equipment. Britain provided dual-use technology. Saudi Arabia and Kuwait funded Iraq with tens of billions of dollars, fearing Iranian revolutionary influence. China sold weapons to Iran. North Korea supplied Iran with missiles. The war became a proxy battlefield where global and regional powers pursued their own interests while Iranians and Iraqis died by the hundreds of thousands. By 1988, both sides were completely exhausted. Iraq had used chemical weapons extensively. Iran had launched major offensives that failed at enormous human cost. The economy of both nations was devastated. International pressure was mounting. Ayatollah Khomeini famously described accepting the ceasefire as drinking poison, but acknowledged it was necessary. On August 20, 1988, both sides accepted United Nations Resolution 598 and the guns finally fell silent. The final result was essentially nothing. No territory changed hands permanently. No reparations were paid. No political objectives were achieved by either side. Over 1 million people had died. Millions more were wounded or displaced. 8 years of war had accomplished absolutely nothing except suffering. The Iran-Iraq War created consequences that still define the Middle East today. Saddam Hussein emerged from the war with a massive military but an economy crushed by debt to Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. His attempt to solve this debt crisis by invading Kuwait in 1990 led directly to the Gulf War and American military intervention in the Middle East. That intervention led to the Iraq War of 2003. The Iraq War created the conditions for the rise of ISIS. Every major Middle Eastern catastrophe of the last 3 decades traces its roots directly back to the Iran-Iraq War and the conditions it created. One war, 40 years of consequences, still unfolding today. Over 1 million people died in the Iran-Iraq War. Most of them were young men who had no say in the decision to go to war. Children who were given plastic keys to paradise instead of education and futures. Civilians who died under bombs dropped for geopolitical reasons they never understood. This war deserves to be remembered, not just as a historical footnote, but as one of the 20th century's greatest tragedies and as a warning about what happens when authoritarian ambition, foreign interference, and revolutionary ideology collide in a region already fractured by history. The forgotten million deserve to be remembered. This is Historiopedia,